Good afternoon. I'm here with my guest, Daniel M. Kimmel. And I've actually, years ago, I did interview you for the Somerville Times.
Yes.
And now it's nice to see you again. Okay. Let me read a brief introduction. Film critic and award-winning author Daniel Kimmel is the author of the Hugo finalist nonfiction volume Jar Jar Binks, Must Die, and other observations about science fiction movies, and the novel Shh, It's a Secret, a novel about aliens, Hollywood, and the Bartender's Guide, and Time on My Hands, My Misadventures in Time Travel. He's the winner of the 2018 Skylark Award, formerly known as the Edward E. Smith Memorial Award for Imaginative Fiction, which is given by the New England Science Fiction Association for lifetime contributors to science fiction. I was going to ask you, because I'm interested about this, you, for a number of years, were the Boston correspondent for Variety magazine. Tell me about that experience.
Well, I was, the person who was doing it was not doing a particularly good job. It was, in 1986, I contacted them, and the editor said, boy, we really need somebody in Boston. Why don't you, get in touch with us and, give us some material. And so for about, I guess about 20 years, I was their correspondent here, covering television and film. They had a separate guy who covered the theater circuit.
Boston area television?
The Boston area, yes.
Yeah.
So ratings, I mean, also, because Variety is what the nickname is the Bible of show business. It's a trade publication. If you're not in the business, there's really no reason to read it. So I would be covering things, like I would do film reviews for them. And the funny thing is I don't think they do this anymore, but the long history going back to its founding in the early part of the 20th century was the reviewers were everybody on staff reviewed. And they didn't get bylines because it wasn't about here's the Roger Ebert review. But in order to distinguish who was doing the reviews, everybody would have an abbreviation of their name. There was like a nickname. And so I was given a choice between Kim, K-I-M-M, or Dank, D-A-N-K. I went with Kim.
Okay. Yeah.
And so I did a lot of reviews for them, but I'm still doing movie reviews. I've been doing that since '83. But the movie reviews that I do now for North Shore Movies, that I did for many years for the Worcester Telegram and Gazette, it's for people who want to know, should I go see this movie? Is it worth the money? The reviews for Variety was, should I book this in my theater? Is this going to make money? Is this going to attract an audience? So it was more of a business-oriented review as opposed to, is this a fun movie?
What are the elements of a good film review, you think?
Well, what I have said for many years, and I'm going to mention that not every critic necessarily subscribes to this. This is my view. You should be able to read my review, disagree with me, and yet I've still given you enough information to know if you want to see the movie or not. Mm-hmm. So, like, for example, I'm a science fiction fan. So if you're not, and I'm saying, Alita Battle Angel is a lot of fun. It's a futuristic action film with great special effects, and you could be rolling your eyes going, I don't want to see this. But I've told you enough that you know whether you want to see it or not. And so to me, that's a successful review.
Now, I noticed that you're a member of the, you've got a lot of support, I was reading from, among things, but since this is Somerville specific, you are in the temple here at in Somerville.
I have been in Somerville since 2010, and I love it here. Somerville has been very good to me. I'm a member of Temple B'nai B'rith. On Winter Hill, and I've been very, very welcome there, and really enjoy being part of that community. Last year, I did a series of lectures for Somerville Council on Aging under a grant from the Somerville Arts Council. And now I'm, as of a year ago, I moved into the Waterworks, which is a part of Somerville Housing, and that's on Mystic Valley Parkway. It's an old 19th century water pumping station. And I left Mark Niedergang, who's on, I was about to say the Board of Aldermen, it's now the City Council of Somerville, is a member of my synagogue. And I told him that I was moving there. And he said, oh, you're going to the suburbs. Yeah. Because I'm literally on the western tip of Somerville. I had to convince the Board of Elections, when I re-registered to vote there, that No, I'm in Somerville. Don't give me a Medford zip code, which is what they were doing. And they finally, oh yeah, you are in Somerville. In fact, I vote right up the driveway at the Visiting Nurse Association building.
Oh, okay. All right. And Somerville is a unique community for you think?
Yeah, I like it here. It's eclectic. I'm a New Yorker, as people could probably tell from the way I speak.
So
But
am I.
but I've been living here. It's
Where
over
are you from in New York?
Queens
Oh,
originally.
from Rockville Center.
Yeah, but I've been here over 40 years now, and I've lived in Allston, I've lived in the Back Bay, I've lived in Brookline. Somerville, to me, is what Harvard Square was 30 years ago. Yeah, I tell people Somerville's a happening place, and one of the things I like, besides just like there's the restaurants and the community and all this different stuff. I like that the city government, I'm going to say something nice about the city government. The city government is responsive. When I moved here and went over to City Hall to register to vote, the person at the information desk said, oh, you just moved here? Let me make sure you get this packet and go over here, and gave me all this supportive stuff. And then a few years later, I'm going to vote. This is when I was in Ward 6. Okay. I was on Josephine Avenue.
Okay.
5 doors from the school where there's a voting place. Not me. The voting line, the ward line was right down the middle of the street. I had to go to Davis Square. I go to Davis Square to vote. This was the 2012 presidential election. The lines out the door, up the block, around the corner, up the street. It was insane. And we waited like over a half an hour to vote. Mayor Curtatone, who was not on the ballot, is walking down the line apologizing to everybody, saying, this isn't right, we're going to fix this. And the next year they moved the polling place and there was more space for it. So I find the city government here is extremely responsive. I like the fact that I actually know several people on the city council. I've met the mayor several times.
It's
a good place.
Way. Now, we're going to be discussing your new book, Father of the Bride of Frankenstein. And it's basically about a gentleman, late middle age, whose daughter is getting married, and turns out that he's marrying a monster.
Right, a reanimated corpse.
A reanimated corpse. He's a nice guy.
Yeah.
He's a nice guy. And all the problems that ensues with this sort of unusual union. It's very funny. I had a few guffaws, I must admit. But I was going to ask you, excuse me, I lost my place here. I was going to ask you, I mean, I know it's a funny book, but this is very topical. I mean, this guy in China's, has developed an embryo from, from cells, and,
Right.
It is very topical.
Well, I'm a science fiction fan from since what they call the golden age of science fiction, i.e., when I was 12. And my strength is humor. I'm not going to write the great American novel. I'm not going to write this serious literary work. I'm not going to write a 12-book series. And so I find.
Did you ever entertain that idea?
No, it's not me. My novels tend to be about somewhere between 60 and 80,000 words, which is on the short side. I know people will go, it's 100,000 words. I've finished my introduction. It's a whole different mindset. And so what I'm looking for is first to make you laugh, to entertain, and then if there's something serious there, and I try to have some serious issues that come up. I mean, there are ethical issues here. We get into legal issues and all sorts of things. If it was possible to, the reanimated corpse thing is kind of far-fetched, but that's the what if. But get into the thing. What if you could reanimate bodily organs for transplant? Would that be a good thing? Is that something we would want to do? And so I get to play around with stuff like that. What people who don't know science fiction well think, this is all about predicting the future. Science fiction isn't about predicting the future. It's about commenting about the present. And so I was trying to comment on the world we're in today. So the fact that that there are these biological things going on, experiments and things where, as usual, our science is ahead of where we are in order to comprehend it or even deal with it. That's grist for the mill.
Now, I was going to ask you, you also are very funny and very sad in a way is that about this media frenzy and all, and how this, like the guy gets sick and then the reporter says, "What does he have, the plague?" and all this hysteria that's going around this, and it's a very insightful commentary on the media today.
Yeah, from being part of the media for many years and doing interviews. And
is it different now than when you were cutting your teeth? I mean, in terms of technology, but I mean in terms of this.
Oh, it's changed considerably in terms of the ownership of the media. I mean, I was just writing something today where
But I'm more interested in the actual reporters and how they go about things. Is it different today?
Well, a lot of it now is because we're in this 24-hour news cycle where it's like it's more important to be first than to get it right. And there's a lot of sensationalism. Listen, I mean, when I did a TV column for the Boston Herald for several years, and I remember there was a story that broke that the editor calls me, "Well, I want you to follow up on this, about this whole thing with the ratings." I don't even remember what the details were, but from having covered the beat, I said, "There's no story here. This is a joke. The TV stations are laughing at this ridiculous story that the Globe would run. We don't care. They had it. We have to have it." And so that mentality, I think, continues. It's just because everything is now with the internet and cable news and everything is so fast paced. It's just happening a lot faster. But that competitiveness and we'll clean up the things we get wrong afterwards. That's a long running thing. And what I try to do, since I'm part of the media, is show the good and the bad. That there are people who are trying to do their jobs and get the story straight, and then there are people who are just totally irresponsible.
Okay. Now, I'm Jewish. I can't say I'm a big practitioner or anything like that, but culturally I'm Jewish. But I was sort of reintroduced to all this stuff that I forgot about. I mean, the ceremonies, the rituals, and things of that nature.
The interesting thing for me, I don't want to pretend that I have this, like vast knowledge or that I'm so religious. I do the best I can.
And it's very funny, Frankenstein. And marrying into a Jewish family.
What I tried to do with this was. I thought, well, why not? Why not do that? My other two novels, I don't get into religious stuff, and I said, let me go with that here. The challenge for me was that the narrator has to be less knowledgeable than I am. There were things that I know that he doesn't know, so that when Frank, the monster, converts and he gets called up on a Saturday morning for his first Torah reading, I know why being called up third is a big honor, but the narrator doesn't, and I don't even bother to explain it because I didn't want this to be a Sunday school lesson. But I got to play with some of the things here. I did tell my rabbi, the rabbi in the book has no relation in any way, shape, or form to any rabbi that I actually know.
In Somerville, right?
No.
He wasn't a totally bad guy. He came through in the end.
No, he's not a bad guy, but I wanted to go with a different stereotype because often what you see in the movies is, oh, here's the rabbi, and it's like, oh, he's got to have the white beard and the whole thing. It's almost like Hasidic. And I'm going, no. And the way I describe it is like if the Fletcher School of Diplomacy was granting ordination to rabbis, that's who they would turn out. That he looks like a State Department spokesman.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Now, I was thinking, I mean, I don't have any children, but I know your daughter's not married yet. She's graduating college. But,
right.
But in a way, to men, I would imagine that when you have a close relationship with the daughter, groom is a monster of sorts.
Yeah. And
he's taking your daughter away. You don't know this guy.
Right. I haven't, she's got a current boyfriend who I like, who's a nice guy.
He's not reanimated.
No, right, and that's why I said no. Frank, the monster, is nothing at all like any of her boyfriends. But she has had boyfriends who I've not been thrilled about, but I've welcomed and been nice to because, the classic response is, oh, I'm going to let her know how much I dislike this guy.
She'll like it even
right,
more.
And she'll drive her into his arms. But my daughter has my sense of humor. She went out with one guy. She goes, Dad, you're going to really like him. Please don't become friends with him. And I said, why not? Because that's only going to make me like him less.
Oh, okay.
So, I wanted to play with that tension that, on the one hand, he's very, nervous and upset and jealous of, who's taking my baby away. On the other hand, he recognizes this is inevitable, just as his father-in-law resented him when he showed up.
Right. Interesting. And look, the humor is, I remember it's kind of Borscht Bell at times. It's
I am a Catskills busboy.
Oh, you were?
Yes, I worked at a place called the Raleigh Hotel in South Fallsburg, New York.
There was the Concord and
Most of them are gone now. The Raleigh is still there, but it was bought out and is now a very orthodox resort. It's a very different place than when I was there.
Tell us some of the comedians you saw there when you were up there.
There were all sorts of people played there. I was there in the 70s. I saw people like Rodney Dangerfield,
He's great.
Jan Murray, Eddie Fisher, was a singer, not a comedian, Henny Youngman.
Oh. My father said he was always in character. He knew him. He was in New York. He was a public relations guy. He said when you ran into Henny and in the street, he would just say, "Take my wife, please."
Right. There are certain people who are always on, and it's been interesting for me as a journalist in interviewing some of these people. And I remember interviewing Jonathan Winters, who was one of my idols, and he was doing some TV special here. And I come in, I go, I've been a fan of yours since I was a kid, but you don't have to entertain me. I'm here to get the story. And he visibly relaxed. It's like, thank you. Fine, let's do the interview, because he wasn't under pressure now to amuse me. And because especially for comedians, that is I've heard stories say like Bob Hope would get on a plane, he would do 5 minutes for the crew.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. He was always needed a war, as the joke goes.
Yeah. But of course, but I think even he needed to have off time. I remember reading an interview with him when he went to China for the first time, right, after the way had opened there, and it was unusual for him to walk down a street and nobody knew who he was. Mm. So even big celebrities need their downtime.
I don't know. I don't know what view you have of marriage. I know. But, as W.C. Fields said, marriage is a great institution. I don't want to be institutionalized. What are your feelings?
Well, I'm divorced,
right,
and dating, and let's not get into that. My feeling is if two people really care about each other and make that relationship a priority, they will get through whatever the problems are.
Husband's a monster.
Yeah, because I have friends who have long-standing marriages, and I know it's not a bed of roses. They've had their issues, but they've cared about eeach other and they've cared about making it work, and that to me is the secret of success.
Amen. So you got about a little less than 10 minutes now. A little less than 10 minutes to read from your work.
Okay, I will read a paragraph.
You read, and
I mean, I probably won't take the full 10 minutes, so I hope you have a question at the end there.
All right, I'll have
okay, this is when the narrator, Phil, the father of the bride, meets Frank for the first time. For a father, meeting his little girl's new boyfriend is always fraught with tension. It's inevitable, I suppose. If this was to become permanent, he would supplant me as the most important man in her life, something I might not like, but I was forced to admit was the natural order of things. All I could ask was that he was normal, sane, productive, and absolutely devoted to making Samantha the most important thing in his life, even at risk of forfeiting his own. I didn't think that was too much to ask. So with a smile pasted on my face, I was ready to greet this latest pretender to the throne. Joanne opened the door, and there was Samantha, scruffy in the current collegiate style, but still our beloved daughter. How many more times would she recognize returning to us as coming home? I wanted to treasure every moment. And then I noticed she wasn't alone. Of course not. She said she was bringing a guest. The figure hulking behind her was immediately recognizable by his ashy gray skin. Joanne and I stood in the doorway, frozen in place. There couldn't be two people in the world who looked like him. Beaming, Sam made the introductions. "Mom, Daddy, I want you to meet Frank," she chirped, with a smile overlaying a tone of voice that made it clear that we had better get used to him. I was more than stunned. I was completely frozen in place. It was Joanne who had the presence of mind to realize that by keeping them at the front door, we were as much as announcing his arrival to the entire neighborhood. She quickly and deftly pulled me back to allow them into the house. After they were inside and Joanne had shut the door, Frank put down their luggage and took my hand to shake. It was cool and somewhat leathery to the touch. "I'm very pleased to meet you," he said, his voice much more adult and modulated than in those earliest interviews. "Sam has told me so much about you." "And she hasn't told me anything at all about you," I blurted out. "Dad," she said in a tone that hadn't changed since she was 4. Frank now took Joanne's hand and leaned over to give her a kiss on the cheek. Turning to me, he gave me a broad smile, indicating either that he was happy to be welcomed into our home or else would soon be bringing it all down in a fiery apocalypse. "It's a pleasure to meet Sam's parents. I truly look forward to giving you both every opportunity to get to know me." We would soon learn a great deal about him. Given his unusual and very public history, there was no need to keep secrets. He was very open, often volunteering information before Joanne or I could gather our thoughts enough to formulate a question. We learned that although he had no memories of whatever life his body had lived before being reanimated, the neural pathways already established allowed him to learn things the previous inhabitant of his body would have known. Thus, he had an adult command of English within weeks of his birth, but had to struggle with higher math as he otherwise breezed his way to a college degree. As we shared meals, we learned that he ate and digested food just like any other human, although he was occasionally surprised by things we took for granted. At our Thanksgiving meal, he seemed fascinated by the cranberry sauce, whose shape indicated its origins in a can, but he savored every dish, complimented Joanne on the turkey, and even had seconds. He shared with us that he wasn't going through the motions. He truly enjoyed the experience of eating just as we did, perhaps more so as he commented on the variety of tastes and textures. "My digestive system is human from one end to the other," he volunteered, adding that indeed all of his bodily organs functioned normally. "Do they ever?" said Sam with a not quite suppressed giggle. "TMI, dear," Joanne replied, quickly cutting off that line of discussion. When we finished that initial dinner, Joanne suggested that Frank and I go out on our enclosed back porch for some brandy and cigars. This was an affectation of mine that she generously and kindly indulged me out of respect for the fact that I had spared her a lifetime of the more typical male time-wasting pursuits of golf or watching televised sports. My limited athletic activity consisted of the billiard table we had in the rec room. If a few times a year I wanted to indulge in a cigar, that was perfectly fine with her, as long as that indulgence was outside. Thanksgiving came during an unseasonably mild November, and the evening was rather pleasant. This was the first time the two of us had been alone together. I could tell the conversation was going to be awkward. I offered Frank a snifter of fine brandy that I kept on hand for such occasions. He made a show of inhaling the aroma of the amber liquid within. Whether he was actually enjoying it, I couldn't tell, but it was clear he knew what was expected of him. "I suppose I should ask if you're allowed to drink," I said, breaking the silence. "By whom?" he asked. "Legally, I'm an adult. The only one I answer to is me, provided I obey the same laws that apply to everyone else." Wonderful. This was going to be another exercise in walking through a conversational minefield. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to offend," I said, trying to smooth things over. "I was just considering how alcohol might affect you." "You mean, am I going to go on a rampage and frighten the villagers?" There was a pregnant pause, and I must have looked at him blankly because he broke the tension with a laugh. "Actually, because my blood flows a bit more slowly now, it takes much more liquor for me to get tipsy. I should be absolutely fine, although I promise you that I will not operate any chainsaws or other machinery while I'm under the influence." There was another pause while I tried to digest what he was saying, and then he laughed again. This was certainly turning into my most memorable Thanksgiving. Here I was sharing a brandy with a monster with a sense of humor. Even more complicated, he was a monster who was dating my daughter. I was at a complete loss for words. Not sure what to do next, I lit up my cigar. It suddenly occurred to me that he had been invited out for brandy and cigars, and so without really thinking, I offered him one. It was clear that he had either been prepared for this or had, amazingly, been exposed to it prior to coming into my home. Perhaps the previous occupant of his body had been a cigar aficionado. He expertly cut off the tip and inserted it into his mouth. I lit another match and brought it to the front of his cigar. I had not anticipated his reaction. "Arg! Fire! Bad!" he shouted, waving the flame away. Oh no, what have I done? As I looked on in shock, wondering whether the brandy had indeed gone to his head, Frank burst out in a roar of laughter. "That joke never gets old. Now you're supposed to say, 'Wait, I was going to make espresso.'" Great. That's what I really wanted to make this Thanksgiving complete. A monster who likes brandy and cigars and Mel Brooks movies. Frank took my hand with the still-lit match and applied it to his cigar, then sat back and exhaled a perfect smoke ring. In the dusk, I could almost imagine he was normal. Almost. We sat in silence for several minutes, puffing on our cigars and sipping the brandy, both activities proving to be helpful in taking the edge off the moment. Finally, he broke the silence. Samantha is a wonderful girl, a woman. She's made me see things in my studies that have opened my eyes. I'm sure you must be very proud of her. I have to admit it, you can never really go wrong praising a child to his or her parent. Feeling the warmth of the brandy, I relaxed and took in his praise. I am. I always have been, I said. But I can't say I always understand her work. Tell me, how has she helped you? Frank paused as if he wasn't quite sure where to begin, and then he just plunged in. My creation is arguably the biggest crisis in the field of bioethics. There's no avoiding it. Even after the court's decision was made to recognize my right to continue my new life, the experiments which led to my creation have remained universally condemned. And rightly so. Now, please understand, I have no desire to create a humanoid army to conquer the earth, no matter what you may have seen on the internet. Well, if it's on the internet, it must be true, I offered. I think I was feeling the effects of the brandy myself. Frank chuckled. However, I don't think the experiments were entirely worthless. I'd like to establish rules to allow strict parameters for certain types of tests. And Sam has shown me a philosophical structure that can be used to do so without crossing over into those things, and here he paused dramatically, that man was not meant to know. I'm not sure I'm following, I said, taking another puff on my dwindling cigar for want of anything else to do. Well, we need to clearly state what sorts of experiments can and cannot be permitted. Anything involving consciousness should not be allowed, obviously. But what about body parts? I poured myself a touch more brandy, not quite sure where this was going, and not so sure I wanted to know. Body parts? Particular organs. A heart, a liver, a pancreas. If we could reanimate organs that could be used to replace diseased or damaged ones, would that not be serving the public good? Is a person with a reanimated liver any less human than one who receives a traditional transplant? I suppose not, I replied, fairly certain this was a candidate for the most unusual Thanksgiving evening conversation ever. I don't know who would give out such an award, but I was sure we'd be eligible for it. Well, I'm glad you agree, said Frank, oblivious to my bafflement. While my focus has been on the consequences of such work in medicine, Samantha was focused on its impact on society. It's something that's very close to her heart. Indeed, our hope is to work closely together after we get our degrees. She hadn't mentioned anything to me. No, she asked me to broach the subject. You see, it's not a combination of career interests. She and I have fallen in love. We'd like to have your blessing to get married.
We're coming to an